I never should have come to Black Hollow. It wasn't my idea, of course. These things never are. They always start with someone like Eric, overzealous, obsessed with the paranormal, convinced that the next big viral sensation is waiting just beyond the keep out signs. I should have known better. I should have told him no. But instead, I let him convince me. Let him pull me and our two other friends, Mark and Hannah, into this mess. Black Hollow wasn't just abandoned, it was forgotten. Once, it had been a booming mining town, its veins rich with coal and iron. But something happened, something that turned prosperity into ruin, almost overnight. The official reports talked about a collapse in 1903 that buried dozens of miners alive. But the locals, the ones who still lived miles away in the nearest town, whispered a different story. They spoke of men clawing their way out of the earth, changed, of families vanishing overnight, of a sickness that spread not through the air, but through the mind. No one in town would talk to us about it directly. When Eric asked an old gas station attendant for directions, the man just shook his head and muttered, "Some places ain't meant to be disturbed." We ignored him. The road leading into Black Hollow was barely a road at all, just cracked pavement, disappearing beneath overgrown weeds. Trees loomed over us like silent watchers, their skeletal branches scratching at the sky. The deeper we drove, the more the world seemed to fade away behind us. No cell signal, no street lights, just the sound of gravel crunching beneath the tires and the distant call of crows in the treetops. Then the town appeared. Black Hollow wasn't just abandoned. It felt wrong. Buildings sagged under the weight of time, their wooden frames hollowed out by decay. Rusted lanterns hung from porches, their glass cracked like blind eyes, and the mine entrance, gaping, dark and waiting, sat at the far end of town, half hidden by mist. A single sign remained intact, nailed to a post near the entrance. "Do not enter, the mine still breathes." I felt it the moment I stepped out of the car. The air was heavier here, thick and cloying like damp cloth. The silence was absolute, not the peaceful kind, but the expectant kind, as if the town itself was holding its breath. Mark chuckled, kicking a loose rock across the dirt road. "Well, this is welcoming." Hannah wrapped her arms around herself. "I don't like this place." Eric, of course, was already filming. "Come on, guys, this is perfect. We'll check out the town first, then head into the mine." I glanced back at the road, half expecting to see it swallowed by the mist. It wasn't too late. We could turn around, leave this place behind. But instead, I followed them deeper into Black Hollow. I didn't know it then, but we had already been swallowed whole. I kept telling myself the unease was all in my head. It was just an abandoned town, rotting wood, rusted nails, forgotten history, nothing more. But as we moved deeper into Black Hollow, the silence became oppressive, wrapping around us like a damp sheet. Every step felt too loud, every breath too heavy. Eric, of course, was unfazed. He moved with the confidence of someone who had done this 100 times before, camera rolling, narrating every step like a seasoned ghost hunter. "This is insane," he whispered excitedly. "Look at this place, it's like a damn time capsule." He wasn't wrong. Black Hollow looked frozen in time. The buildings were collapsing, yes, but many still stood, their insides filled with remnants of lives once lived. A rusted tricycle sat abandoned in front of a house, its front wheel half buried in dirt. A general store's shelves still held dusty jars of canned goods, their labels long since peeled away. In the saloon, a single wooden chair remained upright in the center of the room, as if someone had just been sitting there. It was Hannah who noticed the first strange thing. She had been trailing behind, arms wrapped around herself, when she suddenly stopped in the middle of the street. "Guys, do you hear that?" We all froze. The wind had picked up slightly, rattling the broken window panes of the surrounding buildings. But underneath it, faint, almost imperceptible, was something else. A whisper, low, breathless, just at the edge of hearing. Mark scoffed. "It's probably just the wind." But Hannah shook her head. "No, it's voices." Eric turned the camera toward her. "Like, what kind of voices?" She swallowed hard. "I don't know. Just whispering. A lot of them." I strained my ears, trying to catch whatever she was hearing. At first, I thought it was her imagination. Just paranoia, playing tricks on her. But then, I heard it too. A faint murmur, just beyond the buildings. I turned to Eric, expecting him to acknowledge it. But he only grinned. "This is perfect. We are definitely not alone here." Hannah shot him a glare. "Eric, this isn't funny." Ignoring her, he motioned for us to follow and head toward the largest building in town, the Miners' Lodge. It loomed over the street, its wooden frame blackened with age, its windows gaping and empty. The doors hung slightly ajar, as if waiting for us. As we stepped inside, the floorboards groaned beneath our weight, sending clouds of dust spiraling into the air. The lodge was surprisingly intact. Long wooden tables stretched across the room, covered in a thick layer of grime. Moth-eaten blankets were still draped over chairs, and in the far corner, a rusted stove stood, its door hanging open. Then we saw them, handprints. They covered the walls, dozens, maybe hundreds, pressed into the wood as if burned there. Some were large, others small, almost childlike. They twisted and smeared as though the people who made them had been reaching for something. A cold chill crawled up my spine. "What the hell?" Hannah's breathing quickened. I don't like this. We should leave." Mark ran a hand over one of the prints. "How the hell are these still here after all these years?" Before anyone could answer, a sudden bang echoed through the building. We all jumped. It had come from upstairs. For a moment, no one moved. We just stood there, staring up at the ceiling, waiting, hoping. It had just been the wind. Then came the footsteps, slow, deliberate, moving across the floor above us. Hannah grabbed my arm. "There's someone up there." Mark, trying to keep his voice steady, said, "Maybe an animal?" Eric's face was practically glowing with excitement. Only one way to find out. Before I could stop him, he was already moving toward the staircase. It groaned under his weight as he ascended, the camera light illuminating the dust swirling in the air. I didn't want to go up there. Every instinct in my body screamed to turn around, walk out, and never look back. But Eric was already halfway up, and I knew if we let him go alone, we might never see him again. Taking a deep breath, I followed. The second floor was a long hallway, lined with doors on either side. Many were open, revealing decayed beds and broken furniture. At the end of the hall, a single door stood closed. The whispers were louder now, not just from behind us, but from inside the walls. Something about that door made my stomach twist. It felt wrong. Not just old or broken like everything else in Black Hollow, but wrong, as if whatever was behind it didn't belong in this world. Eric reached out and grabbed the handle. It turned too easily. The door swung open. The room inside was pitch black. Even Eric's camera light barely penetrated the darkness, as if the room itself was swallowing the light. Then the whispering stopped, all at once, and from inside the darkness, something breathed. The breath inside the darkness was slow, deliberate, too deep to be the wind, too unnatural to belong to anything human. For a moment, none of us moved. Eric held the camera steady, the small beam of light barely penetrating the inky blackness beyond the doorframe. My stomach churned as an overwhelming sense of dread coiled around me. The air had changed, thicker, colder, pressing against my skin like something unseen was watching. Then the sound came again, a sharp, ragged inhale. Hannah grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin. "Close the door," she whispered. Eric ignored her. Instead, he stepped forward, raising his camera higher. "Hello?" he called into the dark. "Is someone in there?" The silence that followed was suffocating. Mark let out a nervous laugh, shifting on his feet. "Dude, this isn't a good idea." But Eric was already stepping inside. I watched as his figure was swallowed by the darkness. It was unnatural. He had only taken a few steps, but already his body seemed distorted, like the shadows were pulling at him, stretching his outline in ways that didn't make sense. Then his voice cut through the silence. "Oh, shit. There's something." The door slammed shut. Hannah screamed. I lunged forward, grabbing the handle, yanking at it with all my strength. It wouldn't budge. From inside, Eric's muffled voice shouted, panic rising. Something was in there with him. Then I heard it. A whisper. Not from inside the room, but right behind me. It was close. Too close. A breath against my ear. A voice I couldn't understand, speaking in a language that felt old and wrong. My blood turned to ice. I spun around. The hallway was empty. But the air was alive, shifting, moving. Shadows that weren't ours flickered along the walls, stretching in unnatural angles. The handprints we had seen downstairs? They were here too. But now, they were dripping. Dark streaks ran down the wooden walls like fresh ink, forming twisted shapes, symbols I didn't recognize. Then, Eric screamed. It wasn't just fear. It was agony. Mark slammed his shoulder against the door. His face twisted in panic. "Eric, open the door!" A heavy thud sounded from inside, like a body hitting the floor. Then, silence. I grabbed the handle again, ready to try once more, when suddenly, the door creaked open on its own. Inside, Eric stood in the center of the pitch-black room, completely still. His camera hung limp at his side, the light flickering. His eyes, they were wrong, wide, unblinking. His pupils were gone, replaced by black voids, empty and endless. A slow, twisted smile spread across his face, and then he whispered, a voice that wasn't his. "They are awake." The floor beneath us cracked. A sound, like distant thunder, rumbled through the building, shaking the walls. The whispers surged again, louder this time, coming from everywhere. The very air vibrated with them. Then the screams started. Not ours. Others, hundreds of voices, shrieking from beneath the floor, from inside the walls. The mind still breathes. That sign at the entrance, it wasn't a warning. It was a truth. Something below us had woken up. Eric took a slow step forward. His body twitched unnaturally, his limbs moving like a puppet on tangled strings. That awful grin was still plastered on his face. "They're coming," he whispered again, his voice layered, as if multiple voices were speaking through him. Then his head snapped to the side, and his eyes locked onto Hannah, and he ran at her. I barely had time to react. Hannah screamed as Eric lunged, his hands reaching for her throat. Mark tackled him, both of them crashing to the ground. Eric was unnaturally strong, his body convulsing, his mouth whispering ceaselessly even as he fought against us. Then something moved in the dark corner of the room. A figure. No, not a figure. A shadow, peeling itself away from the wall. Its shape was shifting. Elongated limbs, fingers stretching too long, its head tilting at an impossible angle. It had no eyes, but I knew it was looking at us. And then it smiled. A grin, wide and unnatural, splitting across the darkness where a mouth shouldn't be. I grabbed Hannah and yanked her toward the door. We need to go. Now Mark struggled with Eric, who was still thrashing on the ground, whispering, whispering. Then Eric's head snapped back, unnaturally, his mouth stretching too wide. And he laughed, a sound that didn't belong in this world. That's when the lights went out. Total darkness. And in the dark, something crawled toward us. Darkness, not just the absence of light, but something thicker. Something that felt alive. The moment the lights vanished, the whispering changed. No longer distant, no longer just voices. It was breathing all around us. Something was in the room. Hannah's grip on my arm tightened like a vice. Mark cursed under his breath, his voice strained with panic. Somewhere in the dark, Eric was still laughing, low, guttural, a sound that belonged to something else. Then I heard movement. Not footsteps, a skittering. The sound of something crawling, dragging itself across the floor. Fast, then fingers brushed against my ankle. I kicked out blindly, heart pounding, but there was nothing there. My breath came in sharp gasps as I tried to make sense of the absolute blackness around me. And then Eric screamed. Not a human scream, a sound of pure, raw suffering. The lights flickered back for a split second, and I saw it. The shadow from the corner had wrapped itself around Eric like a mass of twisting limbs, its elongated fingers gripping his face, forcing his mouth open too wide. Eric's eyes rolled back, his body convulsing as the whispers poured into him. Then darkness again. Mark yelled, grabbing my arm. "Get out, now!" I didn't hesitate. I grabbed Hannah and ran, shoving past the doorway into the hallway. I could hear Mark right behind us. But Eric wasn't following. His laughter chased us through the building, warping into something inhuman. We didn't stop. We couldn't. Barreling down the stairs, we reached the front door. But just as I grabbed the handle, it slammed shut on its own. The entire building shook. A deep rumble beneath our feet. Something below us was awake. The whispers weren't just voices anymore. They were chanting. Mark grabbed a rusted chair and smashed it through a window. "Go!" Hannah climbed out first. I followed, feeling something cold brush the back of my neck as I tumbled onto the dirt outside. Mark scrambled out last, hitting the ground hard. We were outside. We were free. But Eric was still in there, and we could still hear him. His voice was layered now, multiple voices speaking through him at once. And then he started singing. A low, eerie tune. A lullaby in a language that made my stomach turn. The ground shook violently. I turned toward the mine entrance. The mist was thicker now, swirling as if something was moving inside it. Then something stepped out, tall, wrong, not human. And it was coming toward us. We should have kept running, but we didn't. We just stood there, frozen, staring at the thing emerging from the mist. It was tall, its body stretched in ways that defied nature. Its arms were too long, its fingers twitching like they were searching for something, and its face. God, its face was wrong. It had no eyes, just a hollow, gaping grin that stretched too wide, lined with jagged, uneven teeth. Hannah whimpered beside me. It's watching us. I wanted to tell her it didn't have eyes, but deep down, I knew she was right. It was watching. And then it moved, not walked, not ran. It twitched forward in a series of unnatural jerking motions, closer and closer. With each impossible step, Mark grabbed my arm. Run. We bolted. The town blurred around us as we sprinted toward the truck. The whispers had followed us outside, growing louder, turning into distorted, screeching laughter. Behind us, something heavy slammed into the ground. It was chasing us. The truck was just ahead, so close. Mark yanked the door open. Hannah scrambled into the passenger seat, and I dove into the back. Then, the air changed. A sudden, overwhelming pressure crashed into us, like the entire town was pulling us back. Mark screamed as something grabbed his ankle. The thing's fingers curled around his leg, dragging him backward toward the mine. No, no, help me. I grabbed Mark's arms and pulled with everything I had. For a moment, I felt him slipping away. Then, Hannah screamed my name. I turned just in time to see her grab the steering wheel and slam the horn. The blaring sound ripped through the air, and for a fraction of a second, the whispers stopped. The thing hesitated. That was all we needed. With one final yank, I pulled Mark free, and we tumbled into the truck. Mark slammed on the gas. The last thing I saw as we tore down the dirt road was Eric standing at the edge of the mist, smiling and whispering, "See you soon."